Welcome to the Art Studio Insights podcast, where we demystify the creative process and exchange ideas with career-minded artists. We are your hosts, Adriana, Ameigh, and
Jackie Sanders. We are two emerging artists sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our journey. So if you're not already, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we launch a new episode every Tuesday. So today's episode, we are following up on last week's Transition Moments episode, and we'll be highlighting Adriana's transition moments. So this series is part where we will really just be discussing those pivotal moments of change that happen as a career-minded artist. So whether you're shifting day jobs, what your dominant income stream is, or just trying to shift your mindset, these moments are really where you change direction as a career-minded artist. So, Adriana, to get us started, how would you tell us a little bit just about your background? Did you go to art school or were you more self-taught?
Okay, so going back way back. No, I'm just kidding. Like many artists, and you mentioned this on your episode as well, and I know many artists say the same thing. I've been drawing, sketching, painting as far back as I remember.
Yeah.
And on top of that, my grandparents, they had a business where they sold printmaking supplies and equipment, and they also had fine art supplies. And I would spend the summers there. So on top of that, I had access to coloring pencils and oil paints and all kinds of materials since I was a wee little thing. So I've been around art and artists, because obviously the place catered to artists. I don't know, as far back as I remember since I was a little kid. I've always taken classes. So growing up, I took different art classes, but when it came time to college, however, I wanted to go to art school. However, being that there was a family business, and if any of you listening know anything about a family business, you know too, Jackie, because I know your family has one.
Yeah.
A lot of times they mean well, but they kind of want you to follow in their footsteps, or they don't. Mine did, so they kind of made it where I had to go to business school. It's what that boils down to. I don't regret it at all. While I was in college, I did take painting and art classes and things like that, but my major was actually in business administration and marketing. And as part of that, I also took, there was a pilot program at the time for small business creation. So actually that turned out really well for what we're going to be talking about. But I took that as well. So we would go into making a business plan, making a marketing plan, and essentially it was like how to be an entrepreneur, type of pilot program where you would work with yourself and how to wear all the hats. So actually, sometimes, I did kind of regret not going to art school, but, fast forward to today for a moment, I'm like, I'm actually glad that I did and I took those courses, because it's been huge. But yeah. Those are my humble beginnings.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a very common narrative for a lot of people, especially creatives, of, okay, they might want to pursue it, but it's perceived that, okay, business school might be more dependable for getting a job, more practical marketing. But I think it's perfect, just like you were saying, in terms of if you can pivot it to benefit you, as you clearly have, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So you graduated college, and what did that look like right after when you entered the real world?
Whew, oh boy. Well, after college, there were two giant, oh my goodness, giant changes in my life. The first one was leaving the bubble, right? That school does for you. So college, a lot of times, and at the time I lived at home. So actually it's a double whammy right there. A lot of times in college and living at home, you have like the support network basically built in. You have these deadlines built in. You have accountability built in. So you don't have to worry so much about where you're going. It's kind of clear, right? So as a college student, your goal is to graduate, right? And on a more short-term basis is to do what you have to do to pass your classes, and like do your homeworks and things like that. And if it's painting class, how many paintings do you have to do for a specific assignment? So it's very predetermined in a way.
Yeah.
And going in, you already know what that goalpost looks like. But not only did I leave, the family bubble and the college bubble, I moved countries.
Yeah. Talk about a shift.
Yeah, so I went from going, I went to the Universidad de Puerto Rico, University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras. So I went from a college that was in Spanish, where most of my friends, we mostly spoke in Spanish. My textbooks are in Spanish. I mean, we all watched movies in English and listened to music in English and to everything else, right? So we're bilingual. But I went from that and, home cooking and like the weather that I knew, everything that I knew.
Right.
For all of my life and flip-flop that completely around, landed in North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Hey, I had an aunt that lived here at the time, so that's how that happened. I would not say this was my first choice, although I do love it here. It was not my first choice. It was either San Fran or New York City.
Yeah.
But here we are all these years later. This was 2007. It's been some time now. It feels like it was yesterday, but yeah, my post school world was so different.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, moved here. I wanted to get a creative job. I'm like, this is why I did marketing instead of finance or accounting or any of the other concentrations. Marketing was the most creative within business. And I mean, all I could find were like sales job that I would not recommend to anybody. But then I ended up working for a bank. At the time, it was Wachovia Bank. Not in a branch, it was in their corporate offices, so that was cool. In their call center, not so cool. So, hey, it was a great place to start. And then, funny enough, I used to be a spendthrift. Oh, really? And I ended up working in the investments retirement area. So literally about saving money for the future. So anyways,
Yeah.
that's kind of
That's
like
about like as corporate as it gets.
it is, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like the universe had a joke with me on that one. Like, oh, you want to spend money? Okay, how about we talk about spending money in the future? As in you save it now. It's like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
So a lot of lessons learned. And it was honestly like the first kind of it was the first time I was in a corporate environment, because even though I did work for my grandparents for a short term, it's much different to work for a small business than it is to work with a company that has like over 200,000 employees at the time.
Yeah.
All over the East Coast, all these branches, all these corporate, I mean, it's just completely different. So talk about bubble bursting on a major level. Yeah,
for sure. So like when you were working at that job, were you making artwork, or even with like within college, were you making artwork with the mindset of building a series, or like what did making artwork play a role in your life at that point? Did it at all?
Okay, so for better or worse, while I was in college, I would say about 40% of my friends were from business school. 60% or more were from art school. So
okay.
Because I mean, I met a lot of them by taking electives in the art department, right?
Yeah. So you've always teetered that line. Like you've always had 2 feet in different rooms.
I
have. I'm just gonna straddle it.
I mean, at one point I tried to change my major to printmaking, and my mother found out and about murdered me and made me change it back. Anyway, so I ended up just doing business. I kid you not, I was going to do printmaking at one point. I was like, well, that's what my grandparents do. And she was like, yeah, but that's to work with them, not to own the place. So she was like, no, business. So I get it. Again, good intentions. Like it happens with a lot of people. Parents are, doing their best. But no, after, when I was in college, I did make art. So I was painting, I was drawing, I was sketching, I was doodling. And again, having friends that were doing art programs, so there were painting, drawing majors, art history majors, were the kind of people I was theater majors actually, were the kind of people that I was surrounding myself with. It was good in the sense that I didn't have quite the art critique experience a lot of people have in college. It was a very different thing because these were my friends. So we
Right.
would compare each other's artwork. And say, like, my boyfriend at the time, right, was a painting major. He would be like, oh, I have this assignment, and I would be like, challenge accepted, I want to do it too, but I
Oh,
don't get
that's
a
awesome.
grade, but I
Yeah.
want to try it. And he'd be like, oh, I got these new charcoals, and I'm like, oh, I want to try it too. So it was kind of a, by having those
Yeah.
connections to the art, art school side of things. Actually, some of my friends were in architect school too, so I got to play with their stuff, but it didn't have the same level of pressure than it would if I went
Right.
into
If
art
you're
school
making it
proper.
for a grade.
Yeah, I mean, I did have the electives that did have a grade, but for the most part, it was almost like a side thing for me, right?
Yeah.
I would have to say at the time, it really was more of a hobby, a very passion, centric hobby. And if I had to do things like study for, confession time, right? If I had to study for, oh my goodness, what was that called? Statistics for quantitative business structures class. Bleh.
Nope.
Anyways, if I had to study for that or draw, you know what I was gonna do, right?
Right.
Yeah, I may have like to spend some of those homeworks, but
Yeah. But that's a very
um,
productive hobby to have, though. I feel like of all the college things to be distracted by, like
yeah,
making artwork is like the most constructive thing to do.
yeah, and it helped me too because at the time I also had a part-time job. So I worked at Borders bookstores at the time, rest in
Oh,
pieces Borders,
nice.
and GameStop.
Yeah.
Anyways, fun places to work at, but the hours sometimes would be a little wonky with college hours. So anyways, art has always been that respite for me. So yeah, in college always did art. Moving over to the corporate world, so I came with big hopes, like a lot of people do, I brought my art supplies from home when I came, over to the States. And not only was I navigating a completely different culture, weather, food, everything, just, and on top of that, a corporate environment, art slowly, to be honest with you, it slowly started to have less of a focus for me. So I would work
Mhm.
long hours, at our call center. This was around the time of the Great Recession. Like literally, I moved in the next year, the Great Recession started. So, anyways, moving back was probably not the best idea. So I couldn't. So I was kind of stuck in place, trying to make the best out of the situation. And instead of turning to art, honestly, I wasn't. I didn't have as
Yeah.
much energy for it. So I would have gone from painting several paintings a month to maybe like a few paintings a year. That's it. Like it was really bad, mostly while I took my corporate vacation hours, that's when I would paint.
Right.
But outside of that, oh my gosh, the more stress I had at work, the less I painted. But then here's what ended up happening. For better or worse, depending what corporate route you go. Um, and the one I was in, which was the investments industry, I can't talk, but we're gonna roll with it. As you move up levels, as you get promoted, you get paid very well. So it turns
Yeah.
into what's called the golden handcuffs. And it
Yep.
happens in other industries too, where I had great benefits, great pay, amazing coworkers. I actually liked what I did. I'm kind of one of those artists that's like both left brain and right brain. And
Oh,
I love
yeah.
spreadsheets and presentations and, I love all this technology and stuff. So I kind of went that way and it made it harder to leave, but then the stress just kept like basically like it kept tamping down on my creativity. So it was kind of this, I kind of felt stuck for the longest time. I felt like I couldn't go anywhere. Like I was in such a good spot, and if I kept on track, which a lot of times in school, and my business school certainly did this, had I not taken the entrepreneurship course, I wouldn't know this. But a lot of what we're groomed for is to be employees for somebody
Yeah.
else. Like I was going to work for my grandparents. I mean, yes, eventually I would own, but you're working for somebody else. So I kind of found myself stuck for years, actually, in that place of my pay is good, my benefit is good, I like my job, I like my coworkers, but this is not fulfilling, and my creativity is kind of like shrinking. So Yeah, I
Yeah.
ended up stuck there for a while.
Yeah. Did you have, I think that's a very common feeling and kind of that like, this is good enough mindset. And especially the golden handcuffs, because I mean, that's how employers keep you working and keep incentivizing. And like the analogy I made on my episode in terms of climbing the ladder. So you want to keep climbing the corporate ladder. That's what you're told you're supposed to do until you get to the top of the wall and you're like, why did I work so hard to get up here? Do I even want this? And so what was that moment for you where did you have like one moment where you had an epiphany about what was happening in terms of your work and creativity pendulum, so to speak? Or is it more like a slow awakening?
Mm, I'd like to think of it more as the car alarm was going off several times throughout the years. You know, the neon signs were
Yeah.
blinking in the direction of art. Because I would still do things on the side. So I did a lot of different hobbies. Not so much painting, which is my number one passion and will always be, but like I would take a course on making your own garments. Why not,
Yeah.
right? Or I would take a course on leatherworking, and I would go all in, by the way. Like, God knows how much money I
Yeah.
spent at the time, but I'm like, I want all the tools, all the things, and I'm going to do this on the side. And it was still a creative pursuit, but
Yeah. It's an outlet.
it is an outlet, yeah. But then again, what started happening is like that's not as fulfilling. And for me, at least personally, painting is where it's at. Creative
Mhm.
hobbies are great and a great outlets, but they're not, you're not working towards something necessarily, right? Whereas
Mhm.
for art, I feel like that's how I evolve as a person as well, not just the art itself. The other
Mhm.
things were making products, and that's different, even if it was just for
Right.
me and friends.
Yeah. It's
Um,
almost like that difference of those classes or workshops were more so like learning a skill and using it as a temporary outlet than like, as we talk with so many artists, like making art and the process of it, it almost becomes therapeutic in a way or meditative. Like when you're truly in the zone making work that you're connected with. And so you were saying you didn't find that with those other outlets. It always came back to painting.
yeah, so it kept coming back to that, but different things kept happening, in my life. Some of them were at work. So, for example, at one point, I was creating the newsletter for my whole department, and I got to put like puzzles in and images and
Yeah.
like differences. Like it was still creative. Whole department, like folks in charge of whole departments with hundreds of employees under them, would ask me to help them with creative projects. One of them, we had to make this giant town hall like event. Over 1,000 employees were coming, and I had to make
Oh my
a
goodness.
version of Family Feud, but for our industry. And I
Ah,
was the one doing the music, the PowerPoint, the games, everything.
man,
So
such a
anyway, so
production.
it was a production. Literally, this thing was on a stage. I kid you not, in an
A
auditorium with
literal
over 1,000.
production.
It was. It was. So,
That's
anyways,
awesome.
so that's why I'm like, I kept seeing the signs because they would keep pulling me through to say, you don't just follow orders, you're also creative. And if
Right.
we go, I have this idea, do you know how to make it happen? I'd be like, oh, yeah, I know how to use Photoshop. I know how to use this program. I know how to use that. And I can
Right.
put it together and make this thing. So they're like, okay, so you know how to turn it, but that was not enough. So just
It's
again,
like
things kept
temporary
popping up.
fixes.
Yeah, it was like little patches, little things that kept me going, but still not enough. So I think one of the first, and I don't like to talk about this, but we're going to because whew, that's what this is about.
Yeah.
But a few years back, I lost my mom. That was a huge one for me. It
Yeah.
left this giant void, this giant hole. I kind of make the comparison. My husband's my sun, my mother was my moon. So it was just this,
Oh.
yeah, woo, moment that I went through, and I had this giant hole, and I started painting a little bit more as a way to process some of those feelings, but still not enough, right? It's
Yeah.
still, I started questioning a lot of, I lost her suddenly. So that's when you start questioning, and she was, relatively young. So you start questioning the what's the point? What am I doing? Kind of like that comparison you did of the ladder before. It's like, what am I climbing up towards? I had up
Yeah.
until that point been considering doing a master's degree in MBA in finance because that's the industry I was in. And I was like, what's the point of that? Do I really want to be like working on Wall Street? Like where do I go from here? So just kind of turn it around. That honestly was one of the biggest moments for me, but not quite where the transition happened. More things kept happening where it just kept popping in. Again, it was like the neon signs were flashing, but I was like wearing the blinders and not looking that art is my calling. So some of the things that I encountered, one of them was a podcast, and I can't remember the name of the podcast because it was a while ago, but they had an exercise about writing your own obituary. I know it sounds grim, but it's good. It's a good exercise, I promise.
Yeah. And it makes sense with where you were at that time too, like why that would stick out to you. Also.
It did. You know, you're in a sad place, right? You're in a mourning place.
Yeah.
You're processing all these different things. And it just got me to thinking of, or part of what was impactful, it wasn't just like the writing of the obituary part. I mean, again, that sounds kind of grim, but it was the idea behind saying, okay, where are you now? What do you do? Kind of like you were talking about, setting up your level with a 4-hour work week, basically establishing that baseline. Where are you at? And what do you actually want to work towards? And part of that exercise was to say, what's your legacy in the world? And that's what got me. That's where I was like, hold up. My legacy is I work for somebody else who's building their own legacy, right? And, you know, as part of that, there's this saying that I encountered, and it just stuck with me. And I found it around that time. I'm rephrasing it, but it basically goes along the lines of saying, if you don't spend time building your dream, you will spend time building somebody else's dream.
Yes.
And it just, building
talk
somebody
about a
else's
gut
legacy.
check.
Oh my goodness, yeah, especially with my last job, which I very much enjoyed. I was working with financial advisors who are building a legacy for their family and for the people they work with, and they're supporting them, and it's great, you know, like I'm helping build something else, but it's not mine. So it just got to that point of like, okay, what do I do? However, up until this point, I never thought of art as an option for me as a career, right? And I think part of what changes during this time of searching and just going, you know, here and there, part of it was I was out on vacation. Super mega random story. I don't think you've even heard about it, Jackie, but here we go. It ties in, I promise. I was out on vacation, and my husband and I, we were, you know, out there. We met this Irish guy, and he said something that just stuck with me. And this, honestly, this is part of when this whole thing, when this snowball effect started. But he basically said something along the lines of, when you work for somebody else, you're giving them units of your time, and your time is finite. Like, you don't know how long you have on this earth, but you have a set number of time units in your life, right? Again, this sounds grim, but it's true.
It's true.
And he basically said, when you work for somebody else, you're exchanging some of those time units for money. Now, doesn't mean it's bad to work for somebody else. Honestly, for the peace of mind of having your rent taken care of, that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad exchange. But he basically said, just keep in mind, they're paying you the least amount they can for that time unit. So you better make sure it's worth it for you, because if you're too expensive, they're going to find somebody else to exchange the time unit for some, you know, doing the same thing for less. And it just kind of stuck with me. And I mean, it was just like, again, another punch to the gut. Anyways, fast forward to, you know, a couple of years after that, and that just, you know, kind of stayed with me. I found this this class for intuitive painting, and it said all levels welcome, no experience necessary, kind of thing. And I was like, well, I know how to paint already, but I'm interested, because it's kind of said it had a lot to do with letting go and experiencing different things. And oh, Jackie, let me tell you, this class by Heather Gurney, if you're local to the area, she's not paying me to say this. I love her. It's amazing. Taking this class, honestly, was it. That was that was one of the big, that was one of the big points, because, and that was not the intention of the class either, by the way. It was a byproduct of the class. I finished the class. It was like a 10-hour workshop over 2 days, over a weekend.
Yeah.
And on the way back of the second day, I'm crying in the car. My husband's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "This is it. This is what I'm
Oh
meant to
my
do."
goodness.
Like what we just went through the class, there were some self-limiting beliefs that had been built up over my corporate career of, no, you can't do this. Plus, there's all
Yeah.
these artist stereotypes and tropes out there of starving artist mentality. And, and it just helped me realize, okay, this is it. This is it. Why have I been ignoring this all my life? This is what I'm meant to do, but how the heck do I
Oh,
do it? So, during that time, I started researching it and I encountered this Japanese concept called ikigai. Um, Long story short, there's a book out there about it where they were interviewing octogenarians, folks that were like in their 80s and 90s,
yeah.
like in parts of Japan, and wondering how the heck do these people live so long? What can we take
Yes.
from it? But anyways, long story short, the concept of Ikigai is you're looking for the intersection, right? Not, and this is not woo at all, actually. It's awesome. It's very, you can make this very practical how
Very
you come to
practical.
it. Yeah. The way the concept breaks down or roughly translates is you're looking for the intersection of, what do you love, to do? What does the world need? What are you good at? And what can you get paid for? So for me, up until that point, that was my
Yeah.
problem, was that last one with all these artist stereotypes. Artists, creatives don't make money. How do I get paid for this? So is this really my calling? So anyways, after that class and learning that concept of Ikigai, I just kept, running into this idea of like, okay, is it possible? So so essentially here's what I had to do, right? I was like, okay, I need to find a way. I have to find a way. Is this even possible, right? So my big pivotal moment was that realization of, I know this is where I need to go. I know this is what my goalpost is, but I just don't know how to get there. That was that was the big thing for me, honestly.
Yeah, so you have this, which is such an amazing story too. And Heather is so, so sweet. I've met her once or twice at exhibition openings. And so I mean, that's amazing that you were able to have such a pinpoint moment, like with her workshop and then crying in your car, like, this is it. This is what I need to do. But like, what did that transition look like for you? Because spoiler alert to the listeners, she does not work at a corporate job anymore. And so what did preparing for transitioning to be a full-time artist really look like? Because you have this awakening and then, yeah, it's like, now what do you do with it? What am I supposed to do to make it happen?
Yeah, so it's like after all those different, again, it was like neon signs, and once the blinders were removed, so to speak, I still didn't have the confidence to leave my job. I mean, it was such a risky move, but I was at that intersection of like, I can't ignore this anymore. If this is my calling, the
Right.
piece that I'm missing, the biggest piece that I'm missing is, because I was like, okay, is it good for the world? Yes, check, right? I think it is, anyways.
Yeah.
It can bring you joy, it can bring you respite, from the craziness of our world. So I was like, okay, I'm good there. That's something I'm definitely passionate about and have always been passionate about. And then, are you good at it? And I'm like, well, if I'm not, I can learn.
Right.
But
And you were already taking workshops and like
yeah,
instilling in your practice.
yeah. So I knew, I was like, I know this is something you can build upon. So yeah, it's a skill you can learn. Nobody's born painting, let's be real. So I'm like,
Right.
it's a skill you can build upon as long as you have the passion and tenacity for it. But I'm missing the money part. Can you get paid for it? So what I started doing is, like you, Jackie, I also make changes once I have a solid foundation of research.
Yes. Calculated
So
risks to
calculated
ensure
risk.
that your odds of success increase.
Well, and again, when you have a job that pays you well and
Right.
you
That's
have
a
good
big thing
coworkers
too.
and you like your job, that's really hard, right? I think
Right.
it helped me that it was a high stress job. So that was part of like the poking in the arm, kind of to keep going. Had it been an easy job, I don't know that I would have quit, to be honest. So what helped me was I interviewed other artists. That was part of the key here. So I started talking to other artists, going to places like Art Space, going to places like the River Arts District in Asheville. For those of you closer to Virginia, there are places like the Torpedo Factory that you may have heard about. So it's buildings full of artist studios of different disciplines, of different levels. And I just started asking business questions, coming from the business world. A lot of them were taken, taken by surprise, that I was like, I don't care what brush you use, I don't care what paint you use, and I don't care about your technique. I just care, how do you make a living out of this? Do you make
Show
a
me the
living out of this?
spreadsheets.
Yeah,
Show me the
well, yeah.
spreadsheets.
Well, maybe that was a little too invasive for like first meeting, right? But
yeah. And so to clarify, so when you say you interviewed them, you didn't like schedule an appointment and have a formal
no,
interview.
I
You just
wish
like
I had.
visited their studio.
Yeah, I just dropped in essentially during open hours. And most of these, kind of like where we are over at Art Space, you can just walk in during open hours and artists are working, and you can say, hey, can I come in? And you do, and you ask questions. So that's exactly what I took advantage of, that these spaces are like that. But instead of asking about the art, I wanted to ask about the business of art. So I would ask questions like, what are your main income streams?
Definitely a business brain.
Oh my goodness. Like, I remember one artist, his name's Peter Rue, he's up in Asheville. And I remember just sitting down, and he's like, yeah, sit down. I'm going to paint while you ask me questions. I'm like, okay, great. And one of the first questions I asked him, what percentage of your income is from galleries versus in person versus online? And he just looks at me like, is that the question you're going to lead with? And I'm like, yeah.
We're going in. We're jumping.
Anyway, so artists like him, and I met many others like him, they were the minority, honestly, of the people that I talked to, were so open about talking about the business side. Some of them were like, oh, I work this job and this is a side thing. But I did meet more and more where they do this full time. And that's what I was interested in, is like, how do you do it full time? And then on top of that, okay, are you full time but eating ramen noodles every week? Like, let's be real. And
like, how will your quality of life be shifted?
Yeah. And here I'm encountering these artists, and they're living very well, and they might even be the sole breadwinners of their families. I'm like, wait, hold on. So you have like wife, kids, you're paying car, you're paying house, you're paying all these grocery, everything with just your art. Amazing.
So these artists were either matching or exceeding what your corporate income was.
Exactly. And that was part of it, because I was like, okay, if I can come at least close to what I'm making now, I'm okay. But if it's way under, then the hubs and I are going to have a conversation about like, how are we going to make this work?
Right.
Does he make enough to pay our bills while I build this kind of situation? Right. But so luckily for me, at least, and I know this is not the case for everybody, that was my backup plan, that I had somebody that if I didn't make enough, could still support me until I could reach the point to replace my income, right? So anyways, long story short, as part of my preparation was talking to these other artists and being able to realize, okay, it is possible, and I can possibly replace my current income. It won't be overnight, obviously, but I can replace my current income and even exceed it with an art business. Are you crazy? What? Anyways, it took talking to several artists to realizing, to letting it sink in my brain, it is possible. And then that's when the official preparations began.
So for official preparation, what did those things look like? You still were at your corporate job and you knew this is something you wanted. What did you actually do to prepare for your transition out of the corporate world?
Well, besides the artist interviews, one of the first things that I did is I set a date. And this is huge, people. If you're thinking of doing this, you need to set a date. If you don't schedule it, you can end up in the same job for years and years and years and never leave, right? In my particular case, I had already been at that job over 5 years, or close to 5 years at that point. And I basically gave myself a year. And I said, I have a year to prepare to make this big change. I'm going to balance the two somehow. But even though that means kind of like what you were talking about in your transition episode, even though that means double hours, right? Almost like two full-time jobs. For me, what it meant was knowing that I had a date made it a little bit easier to manage when I had those times when, oh my gosh, I have no time to do anything else because I'm doing two jobs already.
Right.
So what I did in preparation of it, I was waking up early, crack of dawn, so to speak, painting before I went to my corporate job. And then when I came back, I actually cut out Netflix and I could have like the TV would be off like a whole week. I kid you not. Because I would take that time I would normally use to watch TV or browse the internet or whatever, mostly to make art. That was part of my preparation was to start a body of work. Part of it too was saving money. So I started putting money aside for my job. So if I got like a bonus or anything little extra, I would just sock it away. I started stocking up on supplies. So I was like, I don't know what it's going to look like when I start. And I'll tell you about the year in a second because that makes a huge difference into this conversation. I started stocking up on supplies. So if I found a good deal on an easel or on canvases or whatnot, I started buying them and just putting them in the garage in preparation for quitting. Taking workshops, so it's a little bit easier to justify a workshop when your current job can pay for it and you don't blink twice about the cost of the workshop versus you're relying on your art income and then you're going, how many paintings is that worth? How many paintings do I have to sell to afford that? That's a whole different conversation. So different mindset. So I took a whole bunch of workshops. I networked with a lot of artists. That's how I met you, Jackie. Hey.
Yes.
I started researching local events. I did my first market, and then I even got lucky enough. I did my first solo show. Are you kidding?
Which is huge. That's
yeah,
so
it was
exciting.
huge. It was I mean, it was amazing. It was a great atmosphere, and I had over 30 paintings on display. Insane. But being able to build both of those things, and this is before the year was over, so I was just like, I was riding this cloud. Like that solo show was in September. I had already decided, in advance that I was going to leave in December of, wait for it, 2019. Great timing, Adriana.
That sounds like a great time to quit your job.
Because we all know what happened just a few months later. But anyways, I left 2019 riding this cloud of like 2020 is going to be the best year ever. I am ready. I am so glad, by the way, and I recommend this regardless of what your situation is like. I am so glad that I stocked up on supplies because during the quarantine, a lot of things went out of stock and did not stock back up again. And on top of that, even if there had been no quarantine, having that extra money on the side to help pay for different things. In 2020 is when Jackie and I entered art space. It helped me pay for rent. Like, the fact that I had socked money aside, so it was like less corporate clothing, save it for the art business. So being able to shift some of that money, I mean, it was huge. It was huge. But yeah, mid-December of 2020, I clocked out for the last time. Well, it wasn't really clock anyways, we were salaried.
Last anticlimactic.
Yeah, sorry. I took that elevator ride for the last time, riding into the sunset of 2019 with the idea of a business. But that's how I did it. Honestly, for me, could I have done two jobs? Maybe. And I actually did seriously consider having a part-time job. Not that it would have mattered because then COVID, but anyways, there have been no COVID. I thought about it, but what I did is I promised myself, and I had to have this discussion at home about budgeting, to give myself at least 6 months as kind of like an artist residency, now that I think about it, where it was just about making the art, not worrying about the money, not worrying about sales. Yes, I could do events and things like that, but that did not determine what I had to make. So it was honestly about that. Obviously with COVID, I got more than 6 months of that, of that focus time. But that's how I transitioned. For me, it wasn't sustainable to do both. for me, I am a all or nothing when it comes to art, and that's what I kept
Yeah.
finding. I would spend more time with the business side, plus I'm bad about taking work home, like not necessarily physically, but also mentally. And like, oh, I got to call this
Yeah.
client, I got to go do this, I got to schedule this call, I got to do this presentation. So I kept finding it really hard, even as I was balancing the two, to kind of make that division of like, okay,
Yeah.
now shut off the left brain corporate side, turn on the creative side.
Right.
So I was very clear after a few months in already in the beginning of the transition that I knew I needed to quit, and that if I did a part-time job, it would have to be something creative, something nice
Low
and
stress.
fun and low
Yeah.
stress. Yeah, so that it wouldn't permeate my art, if that makes any
Yeah. And I think
sense.
that's a great point that you make in terms of like similar to my story. Like I currently am juggling both. And I think there are a lot of creatives that go in with that of should I quit my job and go all in right now? Should I transition over a year? Should I transition as long as possible? And that really becomes, I think that's a great distinction of having to kind of have that self-awareness moment of what is possible for you, and everyone's situation is so different. But yeah, how much stress is your day job bringing? Are you able to then just click it off and go into another mindset and kind of compartmentalize those aspects of your life and make those decisions based on you, because there is no right way of transitioning out of job or balancing both of them.
Yeah, and it depends what your lifestyle is like too, and what your financial commitments are like. Like,
Yeah.
not that many years ago, I left one of my jobs to go backpacking Southeast Asia, but my financial commitments at that time were much, much more manageable than what
Right.
they were when I left this job. Usually there's something called lifestyle creep. The more you make, the more your bills are usually. You get
Right.
nicer things, you get bigger things, right? I mean, it's a good problem to have in a way, but it became I can't afford what some artists do where they just quit and then they'll have three side jobs to pay for their bills to be able to manage it, but then they crash on somebody's couch. I'm like, that's not where I'm at. My level of financial responsibilities is big
Mhm.
enough that I need to have a different system. That's why I had to save money and then made sure I had a plan B. Um, but honestly, what I would recommend to people, especially if you find yourselves that you're more like me, where I'm like, it has to be one or the other,
Right.
give yourself time to transition. Don't just quit cold turkey.
Yeah.
Find that other job. If you have to have another job, find that other job. Or if you're lucky enough, your family can help you through it, at least part of it. Um, Find what that other thing is as your plan B. Like in my case, my plan B has always been if I need to, I'll get another job. I have no problems with it. But now that I gave the true blue serious attempt at my art and know what my process is
Right.
like, what my style is like, and things like that, now at this point where I'm at, so this is what, you know, over a year and a half now, over a year and a half since I quit my job. Now, if I were to take a second job, a side job, a side gig, whatever, I know better how to divide the two worlds.
Right.
Plus, I would pick something creative anyway, so it's not too much of a switch and it wouldn't be as distracting as it would have been back then. Now, had I had my style already, maybe that would have been a different conversation, but don't rush the transition. I know artists that take 5 years, 10 years to transition. There's nothing wrong with that. It's really going to depend on what your situation is, especially if you have kids that you have to, provide for,
Yeah.
etc. So you can do both. In my particular case, I was lucky enough that I did have a plan B to help me, and that ability to, okay, I can go back to the workforce if I need to. So
Right.
there is that. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that shift even of calling your job your day job is a really big transition moment in itself. Even if you are transitioning with the hopes of becoming full time or plan on juggling both for a while, at least maybe just because my parents own a small company, especially with your family having a small business. I think there's a huge emphasis on like work loyalty, and we're a
Mhm.
family and take one for the team and we're in this together mindset to where I had a really hard problem, even just acknowledging this is my day job and my art business. I almost felt like it was like devaluing my worth in the day job workplace by acknowledging that this is almost like felt like, I don't know, like a bad word, or like I felt like I was offending someone by saying, oh, this is my day job or just my day job. So I think even acknowledging it, that mental shift is really helpful. But if you are transitioning and going to be full-time artists, what does that really look like? Were there any big surprises once you finally rode that elevator down and made that leap? Like, what does your life look like now outside of the corporate world?
Well, I like to joke back in the day where I was like, well, I'm really diving off the edge of a cliff. Yes, there was a little buffer at the bottom, so we're good there. But I was like, I'm a fiercely independent person. So I was like,
Mhm.
even if I have that plan B we were talking about, I'm like, to me, that's not a forever thing. I
Right.
want to go back to being able to provide in our household the same way I was before. So I already knew going in, okay, eyes wide open. I know I'm not going to replace my income right away, right? Um, so, I was prepared for that. Again, that's the benefit of also like taking time to transition and not doing it right away. But I would say like one of the biggest surprises for me was, and I did hear this from other artists when I was asking them business questions, is how much time you don't paint. In other words, how much
Yes.
time you spend doing all the other business things that have nothing to do with painting, but are for your art business. So to me, that was surprising. I was like, oh, no way. Like,
Yeah.
it'll be like one day a week, I'll do businessy things, and the other like
Right.
4 days a week, I'll paint.
That would be so nice. Imagine. That
Yeah.
sounds wonderful.
Oh, it does. So, what I do is I think of it almost like two jobs, still two jobs.
Yeah.
Um, Literally corporate hat goes on, entrepreneurship hat goes on when I'm working on things like newsletters, social media, things like that. And then full steam, full speed ahead creative when I'm painting. And what I try to do, and this is not an exact science, but I had to do it at one point. I started tracking how much time I was spending in the studio, like painting and doing painting related things. So even if it's mixing paint or washing or rearranging stuff, that's still studio time, versus doing everything else. And I started noticing it was a lot more on the admin side, if we can call it that.
Yeah.
So I started reshifting things around where sometimes I won't post on social media if it means I have to stop painting when I'm in the group. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
sometimes it'll be a few days and I'm like, because if I have to pick between the two, I'm going to pick painting. So I have this unofficial rule for myself, for my current status, where I kind of say 50-50. So half the time painting, half the time doing the other things. And also, I've had several times where I'm on the edge of burnout because then I'll spend, say, 8 hours painting, but then also at 6 hours of social media or, newsletter or business things. That's not sustainable in one day. Like, no.
Yeah.
So I've started to be better about cutting back and saying, okay, when I leave the studio, I'm cutting it off at X time and that's it. I can watch TV, I can do a hobby, I can do whatever, but no more art business related things. Maybe I'll sketch if I really want to, but I gotta cut it at some point
Yeah.
to not make it where I'm working 60 hours a week. I mean, I still do sometimes, but I can't help it. I'm in the studio
Yeah.
6 days a week, but
And
trying
that's,
to find more of that balance. Yeah.
yeah. And that's almost similar, like you were saying, when you were in your corporate job and why you felt like you couldn't balance both is that you couldn't turn that corporate mind off.
Off.
And that's almost the
Mhm.
same now. And then on steroids, because it's your business and you have even more incentive to be fully committed and make it successful. So it's almost, it's good that you were able to recognize that about yourself so you can set those boundaries because yeah, I know so many people are like that, especially for if you own your own business, then you can just work constantly and then get very burned out very quickly.
Yeah, like, I mean, I got to a point where it's like I wake up at 7 a.m. in the morning and I start working, and it's 9 p.m. and I'm still working, on my
Mhm.
business, whether it's on the painting side or the admin side. So I had to find a way to cut some of that back to find a little bit more balance. And I think I have, like, I feel good now. But, to kind of give you a status of where I am today, it's besides, painting, right, which I do.
Mhm.
I do in a downtown studio over at Art Space in Raleigh, North Carolina, which obviously dream come true. And it's public facing. So again, people get to walk in and ask questions, which is fantastic.
And then we get to be next door neighbors, which is
Yep,
exciting.
we're down the hall, like paper plane distance away from each other. So it's awesome. Hollering distance almost. So besides that, I'm also selling in person, which I'm kind of going back from that, from doing events. I'm doing it mostly in the studio. I do sell through other locations like galleries. I sell online as well. I teach workshops. I co-host a podcast with Jackie, obviously, but you're listening to it now. We both founded the Level Up Artist Membership for career-minded artists. So we're teaching through there too, kind of like what we've learned in our journey. So it's still a lot of hats. There's projects that I have like in the air, corporate projects, mural projects. There's a lot of it in there. But I would say all in all, having, to me, one of the biggest game changers is the business experience that I have. So, in my previous jobs, I was working with million and billion, I kid you not, $1 billion clients and helping them, with different parts of their retirement plans, investment, different investment services. Having that experience honestly has translated, and I'm a marketing major, so there's that too. Having that experience, I think, has translated very well into where I am now, and kind of being able to say, okay, I'm going to set some deadlines, because otherwise you can find yourself drifting very easily in an art job, again, without a boss telling you what your deadlines are. Using some of that business experience to set deadlines and goals that I can accomplish, but also being your own boss, recognizing, okay, I feel burnout creeping around the corner if I don't scale back. Which of these deadlines that I have on the list, which of these to-dos are really necessary now versus I can push them a little bit? Because at the end of the day, I'm working for me. So finding that balance, honestly, I think has been one of the biggest kind of learning bits, as a full-time artist. And, knowing that sometimes I'm like, I'm shutting all that off because I'm just going to paint. It's my first job.
And you need that.
I can't paint today because I have all these other things to do. So, but being able to have that flexibility, and in my case, to be able to say, today I work from home, today I work from the studio, today I work from while I'm on vacation, whatever it is, or I'm taking 2 days off in the middle of the week because I feel like it. Knowing that, honestly, I don't know.
No,
sorry,
I love
rambling
that.
a little bit, but I'm like, I don't know.
I love that.
I just love it. It's still stressful, by the way, knowing, because I do have this as my main income source is my art versus having a side job. There's still that stress of like, how did this event perform? Did I sell well? Blah, blah, blah. Am I on track to replace my income? Yeah, like that's still a giant, goal that I have in front of me, and I will reach it. Yes, I will. Yes, please. Working towards it. But having that, recognition of like, okay, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm working towards, and having the business experience to help me drive through the tough spots, honestly, has been huge. And I would not do another job. If I do a side job, it's going to be like, can I do this like temporary? Because if you ask me what my 5-year goal is here, I'm going to say like none. It's painting, not this
like
job.
We just I don't plan on being here very long, and I'm just going to be upfront with you. But
I hope
temporary job.
I hope no temporary future employer listens to this, because that's going to be my honest answer. I'm going to be like, no, I plan to not work for anybody else if I can help it.
Which I think
I can be a horrible boss and work myself to the bone, but I'd rather just work for me, honestly, and the joy that the art brings.
And that's so funny that you bring that up, though, because that's actually, if our listeners have heard other episodes, I am a huge fan of putting quotes on Post-it notes. They're like all over my apartment, all over my studio. And one of them in my studio is literally, don't be a crappy boss to yourself. So it's one of those, you're like, I haven't had a break in 5 days. I've worked 12 hours. I have to get this newsletter out by this time. And you know that you are feeling burnt out. If you were if you had a boss that was saying, you have to get this done. I don't care if you haven't eaten today. I don't care if you're not sleeping and you're totally burned out. You have to do it.
You'd
I'd be
walk
like,
away.
yeah, you're a crappy boss and this is terrible, but we do it to ourselves. And that's like such the slippery slope. So I'm sure, especially as now being your own boss, those have been lessons that you've learned, but it's great that you're
Oh,
able
I
to
have.
recognize that.
Oh, I
Yeah.
have. I've pushed those limits to where I'm like, then I have to take like 3 days off and just stay home in pajamas and eat ice cream kind of thing.
Yeah. Which those
Minus,
days are
you
nice
know,
too.
yeah, but then it's like, it's not that creativity goes away, but it's a muscle that needs to be exercised, I feel like. And this is why I
Yeah.
like to paint, draw, sketch something every day. But it's kind of like warming up to that again. Can take time if you take an extended break. So it's not impossible, but it's a little challenging sometimes. So yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
I would say that's one of the biggest things of like being full time is being cognizant of the fact you're not just gonna paint or whatever your discipline is. You're not just gonna
Right.
do that. You want to run it as a business. What you do might be 50% of the time or less, and you got to be ready
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is great advice. And so, talking to other creatives who may be thinking about transitioning out of their day job or transitioning to prioritize their creative practice with a corporate job, what advice or any like takeaway suggestions would you have for them?
I actually have two. The first one is about networking. So network with other artists. I'm not saying you got to go and interrogate them like I did. But if you're generous and willing to share, it makes other people more likely to open up and share back. If you go in with
Yeah.
that mindset of community over competition, you're going to learn so much more. And especially if you're trying to do art as a business, a lot of us will be happy to share with you. Oh, you want to know what kind of mat or board or canvas or whatever it is we use, or what do we use to keep track, Excel or whatever it is. Like, we're more than happy to help you, but please warm us up. Don't just ask
Yeah.
for stuff. I didn't, by the way. My first business question was rough, but we talked first. But I mean, if you're willing to share and say, this is where I come from, this is where I'm at,
Yeah,
this
and
is
this
what
is
I'm
why I'm
trying to
asking these
do.
questions.
Yeah, like when I was approaching these artists, I told them right off the bat, like, look, I'm in the corporate environment. I've been there over 12 years. I want out, but I need to know that this is possible. Can you shine a little bit of light up,
Yeah,
to me on the
inspire me,
business
please.
side? Yeah, kind of like, can you give me any glimmer of hope that this is possible? How did you do it? I'm not here to compete against you. Our art is different anyways. Even if it was the same subjects, it's gonna appeal to different people. So we're really not competition. So going in with that mindset, I think is really helpful. Learn from others and let others learn from you is what that boils down to. The second big piece of advice that I would have is hone your business skills, people. So
Yes.
a lot of creatives, I mean, I mentioned Excel, and it's like, I don't know, it's like cats that heard there's water coming. They just run away. You need your business skills. I am dead serious. Learn about different apps like Trello. Learn about updating your own website.
Yeah,
Basically,
having a
like,
website,
yeah, learn about
general.
bookkeeping, learn about accounting. When you do this as your full-time job, even as a side job, but even more when it's a full-time job, it is extremely important that you run your business efficiently and legally and
Like a
and
business.
streamlined. Yes, whether you're selling, I mean, some people are like, oh, but art is different. No, you could be selling cupcakes, you'd be selling hot dogs on the corner.
Right.
It doesn't matter. You still have to keep track of your incomes and your expenses and, what's your profit margin, things like that. There are bazillion videos on YouTube that you can watch. There are programs local and online that you can take. There's a small
Yeah.
business administration office almost everywhere in the States that has online programs that are free or really cheap that will teach you all the different aspects of your business, but definitely invest in that. And if you're still doing your other job, maybe do it at the same time as you're doing that, so that you're not taking time away from learning the business side because you're distracted with the art side. So maybe while you have that other job, learn the business bits. They will come in immensely helpful. Nobody wants to work with that artist that doesn't know where their inventory is, how do they price their art. Oh, I got to take this painting down from an exhibition because I double booked it and this painting is supposed to be elsewhere. No, that accountant that like will roll their eyes if you show up with a box full of receipts. Nobody likes that, and you won't like it either, and it's going to add more stress to yourself. So I would definitely say my second big recommendation is take the time to learn business skills. And I mean,
definitely
there's resources.
And as like a shameless plug too, that's also what inspired us to start this podcast, of really making it like tangible small bits of career-minded artist advice. And so we share things that we're thinking about, or that other artists, if you're career-minded, should be thinking about. But then in the level of artist membership that we have, really showing you what do these behind the scenes documents and spreadsheets look like for us, and truly sharing our screen on our calls and saying, this is exactly what we do, how we do it. And in the mindset of community over competition, yes, we are not the only artists sharing forward all the lessons we've learned along the way. But if we can share a little bit, and maybe we watched 20 hours of YouTube videos and we're going to consolidate how it applies to the art world today in a 1-hour video, and that can save that artist 9 hours of time in trying to like go through the noise, then that's really what our goal is. And so in addition to that advice and honing business skills, what book recommendations would you have for emerging artists looking to transition?
I have two that I have handy with me. The first one, it's like anybody that's like talked to me probably has heard me talk about this book. I just freaking love it. So it's called I'd Rather Be in the Studio, The Artist's No Excuse Guide to Self-Promotion by Allison Stanfield. If you are a visual artist, super mega highly recommended. I don't even mark books, and this one's marked up to the 9s. This is a book where she goes into a lot of the different excuses that we make as creatives. Like, oh, I'm introverted. I don't know that I can talk to somebody. Oh, I don't know how to do an artist statement. So do I really have to have one? Or, oh, I'm afraid to like how do I even have time in the day to do all these things? Like, oh, but I don't have that much money. How do I even get started? I mean, she just goes step by step and just kind of helps, cut back on some of those excuses and has action items. So that's awesome. So that's one. This one's out of print, but you can still get the Kindle version, and you can probably still find a used one where used books are sold. And then the other one that I have, it's Keep Going by Austin Kleon. 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad. I really like his books because they're small and they're also very like graphic. Like they have a lot of quotes, they have a lot of illustrations in them. And they're the kind of books that you can pick it up in any chapter. I mean, yes, you can do it sequentially, but realistically, if you just wanted to grab one, sometimes all I have to do is like pull it up and see one graphic, and that's it. That's all I needed, and I'm good to go. So this specific one, he's focusing on different ideas and different prompts, especially if you're feeling stuck and like the inner critic is like, knocking on the door. One of my favorite chapters, he goes into like this too shall pass kind of mindset of like, you're stuck, everything you make, looks like it's terrible. Let's just leave it like that, like you just can't crank out your best, creative work, kind of thing. But he's kind of saying like, yeah, you may feel that pressure, but no, it will pass. Like just keep working through it while not judging yourself and not being too harsh on yourself. Just know the ups and downs. The downs are part of the creative cycle process. Just keep going. It's an upward cycle, but it's going to have little divots in it. But the way he puts
Yeah.
it is like so nice, plain English, fun. I don't know. I really like his
Yeah.
books. He has several, and they're all like small and easy to read.
Yeah,
Hey,
that's so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those and for sharing your story on today's episode.
no, thank you for having me and like letting me like go into all the bits, even the
Yes.
emotional parts. Yeah,
I love it. And I
yeah,
think it's so fun, even, I mean, we've known each other for a good amount of time now, but even diving into the history of both of our paths, we still keep learning new things and making kind of those connection points as to like what we're doing now and how it really does link back with our backgrounds. So hopefully that is helpful for other artists as well. But that is it for today's episode. And so, as always, both of our blogs will be linked in the show notes, where you can find episode notes, as well as links to the books that Adriana mentioned in today's episode, and links to all of our other podcasts.
yeah. And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share what you've learned, what you liked about the stories, or if there's any takeaways from it that you think you could apply to your own career, let us know. You can follow us on social media. I'm at Ameigh Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.